The photograph trembled in my hands as I held it up to General Blake. His face went completely white, like all the blood had drained out of it in 1 second. His eyes got really wide, and his mouth opened but no words came out. Then his hands started shaking so badly that he had to grab onto the desk to keep himself steady. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice cracking like he was about to cry. "She's my—" But he couldn't finish the sentence. He just stared at the picture of the beautiful woman with dark hair and bright blue eyes, the same eyes that belonged to my 8-year-old son Aiden, who was playing outside in the courtyard. I had no idea what was happening. I had only wanted to ask the general if he knew anything about this woman, if maybe his connections could help me find out more about Aiden's family. I never expected this reaction. "General Blake, are you okay?" I asked, but he couldn't even look at me. He kept staring at the photograph like he had seen a ghost. Let me go back to the beginning, to the day that changed everything. 8 years ago, I was Captain Grace Mitchell, and I was on my 3rd deployment overseas. I had been in the military for 10 years, and I thought I had seen everything, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found that terrible morning. The airstrike had happened during the night. When our patrol unit arrived at dawn, the entire neighborhood was nothing but broken concrete, twisted metal, and dust everywhere. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, and there were pieces of people's lives scattered all around. A child's toy here, a cooking pot there, family photos blown by the wind. We were searching for survivors when I heard it, a baby crying. At first, I thought I was imagining things. The sound was so soft and weak, but then I heard it again, coming from under a pile of concrete blocks that used to be someone's home. "There's someone alive over here!" I shouted to my team. We worked for 20 minutes, carefully moving the heavy pieces of concrete. My hands were bleeding by the time we cleared enough space to see what was underneath. And there he was, a tiny baby, maybe 6 months old, covered in dust but somehow completely unhurt. He was crying so hard, his little face was red, and his fists were waving in the air. I picked him up and held him close to my chest. He was so small and scared. His diaper was soaking wet, and he was probably hungry and thirsty. But he was alive, and that was a miracle. "Where are his parents?" asked Sergeant Johnson, looking around at all the destruction. "We searched everywhere, but we only found bodies. The baby's family was gone, all of them killed in the bombing. This little boy was completely alone in the world." As we kept looking through the rubble, I found something important. It was a photograph, a little bent but not torn. It showed a beautiful woman with long dark hair and the most amazing blue eyes I had ever seen. She was holding the same baby I now had in my arms, and she was smiling like he was the most precious thing in the world. I turned the photo over, and someone had written something in English. "Aiden and Mommy, 6 months old." So the baby's name was Aiden, and this woman was his mother. But where was she? We searched for 3 more hours, but we never found her body. Maybe she had been somewhere else when the bombing happened. Maybe she was still alive and looking for her son. I made a decision that day that would change my life forever. Instead of taking Aiden to the refugee camp like we were supposed to do, I brought him back to our base. I told my commanding officer that I would take care of him until we could find his family. But deep down, I think I already knew that I wanted to keep him. You see, I had never been married, and I had never had children. My job in the military was everything to me. But the moment I held that crying baby in my arms, something changed inside my heart. I felt like I was meant to find him, like maybe this was God's way of giving me the family I never knew I wanted. The other soldiers on the base thought I was crazy. Taking care of a baby in a war zone was not easy. I had to learn how to change diapers and make baby formula with the supplies we had. Aiden cried a lot at first, especially at night. I think he missed his mother and didn't understand why she wasn't there anymore. But slowly, day by day, he started to trust me. When he smiled at me for the first time, I knew there was no going back. This little boy was going to be my son, no matter what it took. I kept the photograph of his mother in my pocket every day. Sometimes I would show it to Aiden and tell him, "This is your first mommy, and she loved you very much." Even though he was too young to understand, I wanted him to know that he had been loved before I found him. Now, 8 years later, that same photograph was making a 4-star general shake like a leaf, and I had no idea why. The first few weeks with baby Aiden were the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. I was a soldier, trained to handle weapons and follow orders, but nobody had taught me how to take care of a 6-month-old baby who cried every night. My commanding officer, Colonel Peterson, was not happy with my decision. He called me into his office 3 days after I brought Aiden to the base. "Captain Mitchell, this is a military base, not a daycare center," he said, sitting behind his big metal desk. "That baby needs to go to the refugee camp, where they have proper facilities for children." "Sir, with respect, the refugee camps are overcrowded and dangerous," I replied, standing at attention even though my heart was beating fast. "This child has already lost everything. I can take care of him." "You're a soldier, not a mother," Colonel Peterson said firmly. "You have duties and responsibilities that don't include changing diapers." But I wasn't going to give up. "Sir, I request permission to adopt this child. I'll handle all the paperwork and legal requirements. He won't interfere with my duties." The colonel stared at me for a long time. Finally, he shook his head. "You have 2 weeks to figure this out, Captain. If you can't find a proper solution by then, the boy goes to the camp." Those 2 weeks were like a race against time. During the day, I did my regular military duties, patrols, meetings, training exercises. But every free moment I had, I was taking care of Aiden or working on adoption papers. The other soldiers on the base didn't know what to think of me at first. Some of them thought I had lost my mind, but others started to help in small ways. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had 3 kids back home, showed me how to hold Aiden properly when he was crying. Private Williams, the youngest guy in our unit, was surprisingly good at making funny faces that made Aiden laugh. "You know, Captain," Sergeant Rodriguez said one evening as we sat in the mess hall, "my wife always said that babies can sense when someone really loves them. That little guy already looks at you like you're his whole world." It was true. Even though Aiden still cried sometimes, especially at night, he had started reaching for me when other people held him. When I walked into a room, his face would light up with the biggest smile. It made my heart feel warm and full in a way I had never experienced before. The hardest part was the nighttime. Aiden would wake up crying, and nothing I did seemed to help. I would walk around the small room I had been given, bouncing him gently and singing songs I remembered from when I was little. Sometimes I wondered if he was dreaming about his real mother, if somehow he knew she was never coming back. During those long nights, I would look at the photograph of Amara Nazari, MUDM. That was the name I had learned from the local authorities. She had been a translator who worked with international forces, helping soldiers communicate with local people. Everyone said she was brave and kind, always willing to help others even when it was dangerous. "Your mommy was a hero," I would whisper to Aiden as I rocked him back to sleep. "She helped people, just like I'm trying to help you now." The adoption process was incredibly complicated. There were so many forms to fill out, so many people to talk to. I had to prove that I could provide a good home for Aiden, that I had enough money to take care of him, that I understood what it meant to be a single parent. The hardest question came from Mrs. Chen, the social worker who interviewed me. "Captain Mitchell, why do you want to adopt this child? You're young. You have a demanding career, and you've never been married. Are you sure you're ready for this responsibility?" I thought about her question for a long time before answering. "Ma'am, I found this baby in the worst possible situation. He had lost everything, his family, his home, his whole world. But when I held him, I felt like maybe we could save each other. I've spent my whole adult life serving my country, but I've never felt as important as I do when I'm taking care of Aiden." 2 weeks turned into a month, then 2 months. Colonel Peterson kept threatening to send Aiden away, but somehow I always managed to convince him to give me more time. The other soldiers on the base had completely fallen in love with Aiden by then. He had become like a mascot for our unit. Private Williams taught him to clap his hands. Sergeant Rodriguez brought him toys that his own children had outgrown. Even the tough guys who never smiled would make silly faces when they thought nobody was watching. But the most amazing moment came when Aiden was 8 months old. I was sitting on my bunk, exhausted after a long day, when he crawled over to me and pulled himself up using my leg. He looked right into my eyes and said his first word. "Mama." Not mommy or ma, but mama, clear as day. I started crying right there, happy tears that I couldn't stop. This little boy, who had lost his real mother in the most terrible way, was calling me his mama. In that moment, I knew that no matter what happened with the adoption papers or the military rules, Aiden and I belonged together. The legal adoption was finally approved when Aiden was 10 months old. I was officially his mother, and he was officially my son. 5 years had passed since that life-changing day in the ruins, and Aiden was now 6 years old. We had built a quiet, peaceful life together in the small town of Millbrook, about an hour away from the nearest military base. I had completed my deployment and taken a position that allowed me to work mostly from home, doing training, coordination, and paperwork for new recruits. Our little house had a white picket fence and a big backyard where Aiden could play. It was nothing fancy, but it was ours. Every morning I would make him breakfast while he sat at the kitchen table, his dark hair messy from sleep, asking me a million questions about everything he could think of. "Mama Grace, why is the sky blue?" he asked one Tuesday morning, spooning cereal into his mouth. "Well, it has to do with the way sunlight bounces off tiny particles in the air," I explained, trying to make it simple enough for him to understand. "But why doesn't it bounce purple or green?" he continued, his bright blue eyes full of curiosity. Those eyes. Every time I looked at them, I was reminded of the photograph that sat in a silver frame on our living room mantel. Aiden had the exact same blue eyes as his birth mother, Amara. Sometimes when the light hit his face just right, the resemblance was so strong it took my breath away. Aiden was incredibly smart for his age. His first-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told me he was reading at a third-grade level and could do math problems that challenged kids much older than him. But more than that, he was kind and thoughtful, always worried about other people's feelings. "Mama Grace," he said one afternoon as we walked home from school, "why do I look different from you?" My heart skipped a beat. This was the question I had been dreading and preparing for since the day I adopted him. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Well, your hair is light brown and mine is dark. And your eyes are green, but mine are blue. Tommy at school says I must be adopted because we don't look the same." I stopped walking and knelt down, so I was at his eye level. "Aiden, do you remember the story I've told you about how we became a family?" He nodded seriously. "You said that sometimes families are made in different ways. Some kids are born to their parents, and some kids find their parents when they need each other most." "That's exactly right," I said, smoothing down his hair. "You and I found each other when we both needed a family. It doesn't matter that we don't look the same. What matters is that we love each other." "But what happened to my first parents?" he asked quietly. "The ones I was born to?" This was the hardest part. I had decided early on that I would always tell Aiden age-appropriate versions of the truth, but how do you explain war and death to a 6-year-old? "Your first mommy was a very brave woman who helped people," I said carefully. "She loved you very much, but she had to go to heaven before I found you. She would be so proud of the amazing little boy you've become." Aiden was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Do you think she can see me from heaven?" "I think she watches over you every day," I replied, and I meant it. That evening, after Aiden was asleep, I sat in the living room looking at Amara's photograph. I had told him about his birth mother in general terms, but I had never shown him the picture. Something held me back every time I thought about it. Maybe I was afraid he would want to know more than I could tell him. Maybe I was afraid he would love the memory of her more than he loved me. The truth was, I still knew very little about Amara Nazari. I had tried to research her background over the years, but information was limited. I knew she had worked as a translator, that she was 24 when she died, and that she had been well respected by the international forces she worked with. But I didn't know about her family, her childhood, or her dreams for Aiden's future. Sometimes I wondered if there were grandparents somewhere, aunts and uncles who didn't even know Aiden existed. The thought both excited and terrified me. What if they wanted him back? What if they could give him things I couldn't? A connection to his heritage, stories about his mother, a sense of where he came from. But then Aiden would run into the room with a drawing he had made at school, or he would curl up next to me on the couch to watch a movie, and I would remember that love was more important than blood. I was his mother in every way that mattered. 3 months later, everything changed again. I received new orders from the military, a promotion to major, and a new assignment as a liaison officer at the same overseas headquarters where I had served years before. It was a great opportunity for my career, and the position came with family housing, which meant Aiden could come with me. "Are we going on an adventure, Mama Grace?" Aiden asked excitedly when I told him about the move. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going on a big adventure together," I replied, trying to hide my nervousness. I didn't tell him that we were going back to the place where I had found him, back to where his story began. I didn't tell him that I was hoping this assignment might finally give me the chance to learn more about his birth mother and her family. As I started packing our belongings, I carefully wrapped Amara's photograph and placed it in my suitcase. Something told me that this trip was going to change our lives again. The military headquarters looked exactly the same as it had 8 years ago, but everything felt different now that I was walking through the gates holding Aiden's hand. He was bouncing with excitement, his backpack full of toys and books bouncing along with him. "Wow, Mama Grace, this place is huge," he said, his blue eyes wide as he took in the tall concrete buildings and the soldiers walking around in their uniforms. "Are all these people going to be our friends?" "Some of them will be," I said, squeezing his hand gently, "and you're going to make lots of new friends with the other kids who live here too." Our new home was a small apartment in the family housing section of the base. It had 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with a big window that looked out over the courtyard where children played. Aiden immediately claimed the smaller bedroom and started unpacking his stuffed animals and action figures. "This is perfect, Mama Grace," he announced, arranging his toys on the windowsill. "I can watch all the other kids playing from here." My new job was more challenging than my previous assignments. As a liaison officer, I had to coordinate between different military units and work with high-ranking officials from various countries. The work was important, but it also meant long days and lots of meetings with people who had more stars on their uniforms than I could count. Aiden adapted to our new life faster than I expected. Within a week, he had made friends with 3 other military kids who lived in our building. There was Lucy, whose father was a helicopter pilot, and twins named Ben and Bobby, whose mother was a communications specialist. They would spend hours playing in the courtyard, their laughter echoing off the concrete walls. "Mama Grace, can I go explore the base with Lucy tomorrow?" Aiden asked one evening as I was helping him with his homework. The base had a small school for military children, and Aiden was already impressing his new teacher with his reading skills. "Only the areas that are safe for children," I reminded him. "And you have to stay with the group and listen to the adults." "I will, I promise," he said seriously. "Lucy's dad is going to show us the helicopters, but only from far away." Watching Aiden thrive in this environment made me happy, but it also brought back memories I had tried to forget. Every time I walked past the motor pool where our patrol vehicles were kept, I remembered the morning we had driven out to search the bombed neighborhood. Every time I heard helicopters overhead, I thought about the medical evacuation that had taken away the bodies we found in the rubble. But I had a job to do, and I threw myself into the work. My commanding officer, Colonel Williams, was impressed with my organizational skills and attention to detail. Within a month, I was handling coordination for some of the most important meetings on the base. "Major Mitchell," Colonel Williams said one afternoon as I was finishing up a report, "we're going to have a very important visitor next week. General Harrison Blake, a 4-star general, will be conducting an inspection and meeting with our senior staff." My heart skipped a beat when I heard the name. General Blake was a legend in the military, a decorated officer who had served in multiple conflicts and was known for his strategic brilliance and dedication to his soldiers. Having him visit our base was a huge honor. "I'll need you to coordinate his schedule and make sure everything runs smoothly," Colonel Williams continued. "This inspection is very important for our base's reputation." "Yes, sir, I'll make sure everything is perfect," I replied, already making mental notes about all the preparations that would need to be done. Over the next week, I worked harder than I had ever worked before. I coordinated with security teams, arranged meetings with department heads, and made sure every detail of the general's visit was planned perfectly. I even had the base cleaned from top to bottom, making sure every building would pass the strictest inspection. Aiden noticed how busy I was and tried to help in his own way. He would bring me snacks while I worked late into the evening, and would quietly play with his toys so I could concentrate on my phone calls. "Mama Grace, is this general person really important?" he asked one night as I was reviewing schedules for the 100th time. "Very important, sweetheart," I said, pulling him onto my lap for a quick hug. "He's one of the most respected leaders in the entire military." "Will I get to meet him?" Aiden asked hopefully. "Probably not, honey. He'll be very busy with official meetings," I replied, not wanting to get his hopes up. But as the week went on, an idea started forming in my mind. General Blake was exactly the kind of person who would have connections throughout the military and the international community. If anyone could help me learn more about Amara Nazari and her background, it would be someone with his level of access and authority. I had carried Amara's photograph with me for 8 years, always hoping that someday I would find someone who could tell me more about Aiden's birth mother. Maybe this was finally my chance. The night before General Blake's arrival, I carefully placed the photograph in my uniform pocket. I didn't have a specific plan, but I hoped that during one of our coordination meetings, I might find the right moment to ask for his help. I had no idea that showing him that photograph would change everything. General Blake couldn't take his eyes off the photograph. His hands were shaking so badly now that I was worried he might collapse. The color had completely drained from his face, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. "General, please sit down," I said, quickly pulling out a chair for him. "Can I get you some water?" He sat down heavily, still staring at the picture of Amara holding baby Aiden. His voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke again. "She's my daughter," he said, the words coming out like they were being torn from his heart. "Amara is my daughter." I felt like the world had stopped spinning. "Your daughter?" I repeated, not sure I had heard him correctly. "I haven't seen her in 6 years," General Blake continued, his voice breaking. "We had a terrible fight before my last deployment. She wanted to stay in the region as a translator, and I forbade it. I told her it was too dangerous, that she needed to come back to the States with me. But she was so stubborn, so determined to help people." He looked up at me with eyes that were exactly the same shade of blue as Aiden's. "We said horrible things to each other that day. I told her that if she stayed, she was no longer my daughter. She told me that she never wanted to see me again. And then I left, and I never—" His voice trailed off as the full weight of what I was telling him began to sink in. "You said you found a baby in the ruins. That baby. Is he?" "His name is Aiden," I said softly. "He's 8 years old now, and he's the most amazing little boy you could ever imagine. He's smart and kind and curious about everything, and he has your eyes." General Blake put his head in his hands and started to cry. This powerful, decorated military leader was sobbing like a broken man. "My grandson," he whispered. "I have a grandson, and I never knew." "General Blake," I said gently, "Aiden is here on the base with me. He's my son now. I adopted him legally, but if you want to meet him—" "Yes," he said immediately, looking up at me with desperate hope in his eyes. "Please, yes, I need to meet him." I called the family housing unit and asked Mrs. Rodriguez, one of the other military wives, to bring Aiden to my office. While we waited, General Blake told me about Amara. "She was always so independent," he said, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "Even as a little girl, she wanted to save the world. Her mother died when she was 12, and after that, it was just the two of us. I thought I was protecting her by keeping her close, but she saw it as controlling her life." "She sounds like she was an incredible person," I said. "Everyone I talked to said she was brave and compassionate." "She was," he agreed. "She spoke 4 languages and had a degree in international relations. She could have had any job she wanted back home, but she chose to stay and help people who needed her most." There was a knock on the door, and Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with Aiden. He looked a little nervous, probably wondering why he was being brought to see his mom at work. "Mama Grace, is everything okay?" he asked, running over to me. "Everything is perfect, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to his level. "Aiden, I want you to meet someone very special. This is General Blake." Aiden looked at the general with curiosity. "Are you the important person Mama Grace has been working so hard for?" General Blake stared at Aiden in wonder, taking in every detail of his face. "Yes, I am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you must be, Aiden. I've heard wonderful things about you." "Nice to meet you, sir," Aiden said politely, the way I had taught him to greet adults. "Aiden," I said carefully, "General Blake knew your first mommy, the one I told you about who went to heaven." Aiden's eyes got wide. "Really? You knew my first mommy?" General Blake knelt down so he was at Aiden's eye level, just like I always did. "Yes, I did. Her name was Amara, and she was the most wonderful person I ever knew. She was brave and smart and kind, just like you." "What was she like?" Aiden asked eagerly. "Mama Grace doesn't know very much about her." "She loved to read books, just like you do," General Blake said, his voice getting stronger as he talked about his daughter. "And she was always asking questions about everything, wanting to learn new things. She would have been so proud of you." "Do you have pictures of her?" Aiden asked hopefully. "I do," General Blake said. Lots of pictures. And I have stories about her childhood, about the games she liked to play, and the songs she used to sing. Aiden looked at me with excitement. Mama Grace, can General Blake tell me the stories? I looked at General Blake, and I could see the hope and love in his eyes. This man had lost his daughter, but now he had found his grandson. And Aiden, who had always wondered about his first family, finally had someone who could tell him about his mother. I think that would be wonderful, I said. General Blake smiled through his tears. I would love nothing more than to tell you about your mother, Aiden. She was amazing. And you are going to be amazing too. As I watched my son and his grandfather begin to build a relationship, I knew our little family was about to become something even more special.